An immortal ruler is rotting from the inside out, and all the money in the world couldn't stop it. The hidden elite panicked, yet the only cure wasn't found in a billion-dollar lab. It ran through the veins of a 22-year-old street sweeper who didn't even know she existed. In the hidden subterranean echelons of Chicago's ultra-wealthy, a terrifying rumor had begun to spread. Nathaniel Vane was dying. To the mortal world, Nathaniel was the reclusive, fiercely private 34-year-old billionaire CEO of Vane Holdings, a biomedical research empire that seemingly owned half the city's skyline. To the shadows, however, he was something far older and far more dangerous. He was the undisputed apex predator of North America, a vampire lord who had ruled with an iron fist and a terrifying, flawless composure for over 4 centuries. He was supposed to be untouchable. He was supposed to be immortal. But for the last 6 months, a biological curse known only in ancient, hushed texts as the White Ash had been eating him alive from the inside out. It started as a simple weakness, a sudden inability to heal from minor sunlight burns. Then came the physical decay. The White Ash was a retrovirus that strictly targeted immortal cells, turning a vampire's blood to a toxic sludge and causing their physical form to slowly calcify into brittle, white dust. It was agonizing, incurable, and highly contagious to his own kind through blood sharing. As his condition worsened, the hidden society of the night began to fracture. Without his terrifying strength to keep the rival factions in line, an underground civil war was brewing, one that would undoubtedly spill out onto the mortal streets of Chicago. Confined to his sprawling, hermetically sealed penthouse above the city clouds, Nathaniel sat in a custom-built medical chair, his breath shallow. His once flawless skin was now starkly translucent, spiderwebbed with jagged black veins that pulsed with a sickening rhythm. "His cellular regeneration is down to 4%, Dominic," whispered Dr. Gregory Hale, the chief medical officer of Nathaniel's private medical division. Hale wiped sweat from his brow, terrified that his failure would cost him his life. Standing in the shadows of the penthouse was Dominic Fry, Nathaniel's ruthless, calculating second-in-command. Dominic's eyes were cold, fixed on the dying king. "You told me a week ago we had a lead, Gregory. You drained millions into that genetic sequencing project. Where is my lord's cure?" "We are running every permutation, but the mutation is too aggressive," Hale stammered, pulling up a holographic medical chart. "The only thing that can reverse the calcification is a specific, naturally occurring human antigen, a biological anomaly so rare that it hasn't been documented since the late 14th century. We've scanned the blood banks of 70 countries. It doesn't exist anymore." "Keep looking," a rasping, echoing voice commanded. Nathaniel opened his eyes. They were once a brilliant, terrifying crimson, but now they were dull, rimmed with sickly grey. "If I fall, Dominic, you will not be able to hold the eastern factions. The streets will run red. Find it." While a dying king gasped for breath in a glass tower, 50 stories below, Rowan Gallagher was just trying to survive a Tuesday. Rowan was 22, fiercely independent, and exhausted down to her bones. Orphaned at 6 and chewed up by the brutal foster care system, she had learned early that the world didn't hand out miracles to girls from the South Side. She had a mountain of medical debt left behind by her late foster mother, an eviction notice taped to her apartment door, and a night shift job as an industrial cleaner at the Hale Diagnostics primary laboratory. She wore a faded blue jumpsuit, her dark hair pulled back into a messy bun, as she pushed a heavy floor buffer down the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallways of the clinic. The smell of bleach and ozone was burned into her sinuses. She didn't mind the quiet of the night shift. It kept her away from people, and people usually meant trouble. "Hey, Ro!" called out Brenda, the exhausted night shift nurse, leaning out of the phlebotomy lab. HR just sent down a memo. Mandatory annual employee blood screenings. They're locking out the key cards of anyone who doesn't do it by midnight. Corporate policy. Rowan sighed, turning off the floor buffer. Can't I just give them a swab? I hate needles. Takes 2 seconds. Come on, sit down. Let's get it over with so I can go back to my crosswords, Brenda said gently. Reluctantly, Rowan rolled up her sleeve. She had always hated doctors. She had a strange medical history, never catching a cold, never getting the flu, cuts healing almost overnight. Her foster mother used to joke she was made of iron. But iron didn't pay the bills. Brenda slid the needle into Rowan's vein, drawing 2 small vials of rich, dark red blood. There, done. Put a cotton ball on it. I'll run it through the automated sequencer right now. Rowan pressed her thumb to the crook of her arm, watching as Brenda slotted the vial into a massive monolithic machine that Hale Diagnostics used to process thousands of samples a night. Rowan turned to grab her mop bucket, eager to get back to the mindless rhythm of her work. She didn't see the machine's primary screen flash from green to a stark, glaring red. She didn't see the error message, followed by a highly classified, heavily encrypted override code executing itself. She didn't see Brenda's face go completely pale as a silent, top-tier security alarm bypassed the local network and pinged directly to the encrypted servers at the top of the Vane Tower. Match found. Subject: Rowan Gallagher. Genetic profile: RH-null/Lazarus strain. Phenotype positive. 10 minutes later, Rowan was taking the service elevator down to the alley to dump the trash. The Chicago rain was coming down in sheets, slicking the cobblestones and drowning out the noise of the city. She hauled the heavy black bag into the dumpster, shivering in the damp cold. When she turned around, a matte black SUV was blocking the alley entrance. 3 men stepped out. They moved with a terrifying, liquid grace that didn't seem entirely human. They wore tailored black suits, completely unbothered by the torrential rain. Rowan's street instincts kicked in immediately. She didn't ask who they were or what they wanted. She dropped her keys and sprinted for the chain-link fence at the back of the alley. She was fast, fueled by raw adrenaline, her fingers gripping the wet metal mesh. She made it exactly 3 feet off the ground before a hand clamped onto the back of her jacket. It felt like being grabbed by industrial machinery. She was yanked backward, hitting the wet pavement hard. "Let me go!" she screamed, thrashing wildly, aiming a vicious kick at the closest man's knee. Her boot connected with a sickening crunch, but the man didn't even flinch. He just looked down at her with cold, glowing amber eyes. "Rowan Gallagher," the man said, his voice entirely devoid of breath. "The master requires your presence." Before she could scream again, a sharp prick hit the side of her neck. The alley spun violently, the rain seemed to freeze in mid-air, and the world went totally, overwhelmingly black. Rowan woke up to the sound of a steady, rhythmic beep. Her eyes snapped open. She wasn't in an alley. She wasn't in a hospital. She was lying on a massive, velvet-draped bed in a room that looked like a cross between a royal tomb and a state-of-the-art intensive care unit. The walls were dark mahogany, lined with ancient leather-bound books, but the corners of the room were crowded with heart monitors, IV stands, and biometric scanners. Panic seized her throat. She scrambled backward, her back hitting the massive oak headboard. "I strongly advise against sudden movements, Miss Gallagher. The sedatives we used were quite heavy." A smooth, cultured voice echoed from the shadows. A man stepped into the dim light. It was Dominic Fry. He was impeccably dressed, handsome in a terrifyingly sharp way, but there was a cruel, calculating tilt to his smile. "Where am I?" "Who are you people?" Rowan demanded, her voice shaking, though she forced her chin up. "If this is about my foster mum's debts, I swear I'm paying them off." "This has nothing to do with mortal currency," Dominic interrupted smoothly, stepping closer. "In fact, all of your debts were electronically erased 5 minutes ago. Your rent is paid for the next 10 years. You have a newly opened offshore account with a balance of $5 million. Rowan froze. "What?" "Consider it a signing bonus, or a life insurance payout," Dominic purred, though his eyes lacked any warmth. "You see, Miss Gallagher, you possess something incredibly valuable to my employer. A biological lottery ticket." Before she could process the sheer absurdity of his words, the heavy double doors on the far side of the bedroom groaned open. Dr. Gregory Hale walked in, looking like he hadn't slept in a decade, flanked by 2 heavily armed guards. "Bring her in," Hale muttered. "He's fading again." Dominic grabbed Rowan by the arm. His grip was impossibly strong, cold as a winter pipe. He hauled her off the bed. She struggled, kicking and pulling, but he dragged her effortlessly through the double doors into an even larger, freezing cold chamber. The room smelled of antiseptic and old copper. In the center of the room sat a massive chair, hooked up to a dozen dialysis machines. Sitting in the chair was the most terrifyingly beautiful man Rowan had ever seen, even in his state of ruin. Nathaniel Vane looked up as she was dragged into the room. He was emaciated, his cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, his skin a translucent marble webbed with creeping black decay. But the aura of sheer crushing authority he radiated made Rowan's knees buckle. When his eyes locked onto hers, a jolt of pure, primal electricity shot down her spine. It was a predator looking at prey, but there was something else there. Desperation. "So," Nathaniel whispered, his voice a gravelly, resonant baritone that vibrated in her chest. "This is the miracle. A mortal girl with dirt under her fingernails." "Let me go," Rowan yelled, shoving hard against Dominic. "Release her, Dominic," Nathaniel commanded. "My lord, she is a flight risk." "I said release her," Nathaniel snarled. For a split second, the air in the room actually dropped 10 degrees. The monitors around him spiked wildly. Dominic immediately let go, stepping back with a tight, resentful bow. Rowan stumbled forward, rubbing her bruised arm, staring wildly at the dying man in the chair. "What do you want from me?" "Your blood, Miss Gallagher," Nathaniel said bluntly, leaning his head back against the leather chair, exhaustion creeping back into his features. "I am not human. I am what your stories call a vampire, and I am dying of a disease that is turning my cells to ash. My brilliant doctor here informs me that you are the sole carrier of the Lazarus strain, a genetic mutation passed down from the survivors of the Black Plague, combined with an Rh-null blood type. Your blood contains the exact antibodies required to rewrite my decaying genome." Rowan stared at him, her mind fracturing. Vampires, secret diseases, billionaires in the shadows. It was absolute insanity. But the unnatural cold in the room, the glowing eyes of the men in the shadows, and the black rot on Nathaniel's face told her it was all horrifyingly real. "So what?" she breathed, her voice trembling. "You kidnapped me to use me as a juice box? Just take it. Drain me and let me go." Dr. Hale stepped forward, clearing his throat nervously. It is not that simple, Miss Gallagher. If it were, we would have done it while you were unconscious." Nathaniel's jaw tightened in visible frustration. "Explain it to her, doctor," Nathaniel rasped. Hale wiped his glasses. "The antibodies in your blood are highly volatile. They are dormant. If we extract the blood forcibly, or if you are in a state of terror, Your body floods the bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline. In a normal human, this is a standard stress response. But for a vampire suffering from the white ash, cortisol-laced Lazarus blood rapidly coagulates. It turns into a lethal neurotoxin. If he drinks it while you are afraid or unwilling, it will kill him instantly. Rowan blinked, trying to pass the medical jargon. What are you saying? Nathaniel slowly leaned forward, his decaying hands gripping the armrests of his chair. His piercing, dull, crimson eyes locked onto hers, holding a strange mix of loathing for his own weakness and intense vulnerability. He is saying, Rowan, that I cannot take your blood by force, Nathaniel said softly. The enzymes only activate when the host is in a state of physiological elevation. Trust, empathy, willing surrender, even passion. Your body must flood the blood with oxytocin and endorphins at the exact moment of extraction. The room went dead silent. The terrifying reality of the situation crashed down on Rowan. He didn't just need her blood. He needed her to want to give it to him. He needed her to care about a monster. You're insane, Rowan whispered, taking a step back. You kidnapped me off the street. Your goons dragged me here. You think I'm ever going to feel anything but terror around you. You're going to die. A tense, dangerous silence filled the freezing room. Dominic shifted in the shadows, his hand resting on the hilt of a concealed blade, a subtle gleam of dark satisfaction in his eyes. If the girl refused, Nathaniel would die. And if Nathaniel died, Dominic would take the throne. Nathaniel saw Dominic's subtle movement. He knew the treason brewing in his own ranks. His empire, his life, all of it now rested entirely in the hands of a stubborn, terrified human girl who owed him nothing. With agonizing slowness, Nathaniel pushed himself up from the medical chair. The monitors shrieked in warning as he ripped the IV lines from his arms. He stumbled, falling to one knee on the cold marble floor, right at Rowan's feet. "My lord!" Dominic stepped forward, masking his eagerness with fake concern. "Stay back!" Nathaniel roared, the sheer force of his voice rattling the glass windows of the penthouse. He looked up at Rowan. The terrifying predator was gone. In his place was a broken, desperate creature, humbled by biology and fate. "You are right to hate me, Rowan," Nathaniel whispered, his black-veined hand reaching out, stopping inches from her shoe, refusing to touch her without permission. "I have taken your life from you, but if I die tonight, the men in this room will not let you leave alive. Dominic will bleed you dry just to ensure the cure dies with me. We are bound to this nightmare together now." Rowan looked down at the monstrous billionaire kneeling on the floor, and then flicked her eyes to Dominic, catching the brief, murderous scowl on the second-in-command's face. She was trapped in a den of wolves, and her only chance of surviving the pack was to save the wounded Alpha. "Okay," Rowan breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She crouched down, meeting Nathaniel's glowing eyes. "What do I have to do?" For the next 2 weeks, the penthouse at the top of the Vane Tower became a bizarre, suffocating purgatory. Rowan was given the master suite, a wardrobe of silk and cashmere that cost more than her entire neighborhood, and absolute freedom, so long as she never approached the elevators. But all the luxury in the world couldn't mask the grim reality of her task. She had to build an emotional bond with a dying apex predator. If she faked it, the biometric sensors hooked up to her chest and wrists would betray her. Her cortisol levels were constantly monitored by Dr. Hale. Every time Nathaniel entered the room, her heart rate spiked with perfectly rational human terror, and the monitors would flash a warning red. Her blood remained highly toxic to him. "You are looking at me like I am a cornered wolf, Miss Gallagher," Nathaniel murmured one evening. He was seated by the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the glittering Chicago skyline. A heavy wool blanket draped over his shoulders. The calcification had spread to his neck. His breaths were shallow, rattling in his chest like dry leaves. He looked impossibly frail, yet his presence still commanded the entire room. Rowan stood by the fireplace, clutching a mug of tea as if it were a weapon. "You kidnapped me. You have armed guards outside my door. Forgive me if I don't feel like making small talk." Nathaniel let out a dry, humorless laugh that ended in a violent coughing fit. When he pulled his handkerchief away, it was stained with thick, black ash. "I did not build this city by asking politely, Rowan," he said, his voice faint but unwavering. He gestured to the sprawling metropolis below. "Do you know who funded the reconstruction of the Palmer House Hotel after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, or who secretly bankrolled Daniel Burnham's architectural firm to ensure the city was rebuilt with steel rather than wood?" Rowan frowned, stepping marginally closer. "History books say it was private investors." "I was the investor," Nathaniel said softly, his dull crimson eyes reflecting the city lights. "I watched this city burn to the ground. I heard the screams. My kind. We usually do not interfere with mortal tragedies, but I could not watch them suffer. I poured my fortune into the relief funds. I built the orphanages in the South Side, the very ones you grew up in. I tried to be a protector in the shadows, but shadows breed their own monsters." He looked away, the shame visible beneath the decaying veins on his face. "And now, I have become the very monster I sought to protect this city from. I reduced myself to a kidnapper because I am terrified of the dark. I am sorry, Rowan." It was the first time she had ever heard a billionaire, let alone an immortal king, apologize. Rowan took another step forward. She looked past the terrifying aura, past the wealth and the fangs, and saw a man who was deeply, profoundly lonely. A man who had carried the weight of a hidden empire for centuries and was now dying a slow, humiliating death. "You didn't want to hurt me," she said quietly. "Never," he whispered. For the first time since she arrived, the biometric monitor on her wrist blinked from glaring red to a steady, calming green. Her stress hormones were dropping. Empathy was taking root. From the shadows of the observation deck above, Dominic Fry watched the monitor turn green. His jaw tightened in furious panic. The girl was actually doing it. She was forming a bond. If Nathaniel drank from her now, the Lazarus strain would activate, and the king would be restored. Dominic's chance at the throne was slipping through his fingers. He pulled a silenced, encrypted radio from his suit jacket. "Cut the power to the penthouse," Dominic ordered his loyalists in the security detail. "Initiate the emergency lockdown protocols. Release the fear toxin into the ventilation." Down in the suite, the lights violently snapped off. The heavy steel blast doors slammed shut over the windows, plunging the room into absolute darkness. Rowan gasped, dropping her mug. It shattered on the marble floor. Suddenly, a thick, acrid white smoke began pouring from the air vents. The moment she breathed it in, a synthetic, primal panic hijacked her nervous system. It was a chemical hallucinogen designed to send her into a state of absolute terror. "Nathaniel!" she screamed, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs as shadows seemed to warp and twist into monstrous shapes. The monitor on her wrist shrieked a deafening red alarm. Her blood was instantly flooding with toxic levels of cortisol. "Rowan!" Through the darkness, Nathaniel moved. Despite the white ash devouring his muscles, despite the agonizing pain, the instinct to protect his chosen anchor overrode his biological failure. He crashed through the coffee table, wrapping his freezing, trembling arms around her, just as armed men in tactical gear kicked open the suite doors. "Kill the girl," Dominic's voice barked from the hallway. "The master has gone rabid. It's a mercy killing." Gunfire erupted. Nathaniel spun, shielding Rowan with his own decaying body. Bullets tore into his back. For a healthy vampire, it would be a nuisance. For a man crumbling to dust, it was devastating. He roared in agony, falling to his knees, but he refused to let her go, curling his body over hers to protect her from the barrage. "I have you," Nathaniel choked out, blood spilling from his lips. "I will not let them touch you," pressed against his chest, listening to his failing, agonizingly slow heartbeat. The chemical terror in Rowan's mind fractured. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid for him. She realized with a blinding rush of clarity that this terrifying, ancient king was sacrificing his very last breath to save a girl from the slums. The fear evaporated, replaced by a fierce, overwhelming surge of protective devotion. Adrenaline mixed with a profound, rushing warmth. The monitor on her shattered wrist flared a brilliant, blinding green. "Pull him off her," Dominic shouted, stepping into the ruined suite with a silver-plated hunting knife drawn. Two tactical guards grabbed Nathaniel by the shoulders, tearing him away from Rowan. The vampire king collapsed onto the carpet, a horrific rattling sound echoing from his chest. The calcification had reached his heart. His skin was flaking away into pale dust. He had minutes left, at most. Dominic approached Rowan, grabbing her by the hair and pressing the silver blade to her throat. Such a tragic end. The little orphan couldn't handle the pressure. Her blood turned to poison, and our glorious king starved. Rowan looked Dominic dead in the eye. The streets of the South Side had taught her one universal truth. You never show a bully your throat unless you're preparing to bite theirs. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She drove her elbow backward with every ounce of strength she possessed, catching Dominic squarely in the ribs. As he grunted and his grip loosened, Rowan grabbed a jagged shard of the broken ceramic mug from the floor and drove it directly into the thigh of the closest guard. The man howled, dropping his weapon. Rowan scrambled across the blood-slicked floor, throwing herself at Nathaniel's side. "Stop her!" Dominic roared, recovering and lunging forward. Rowan didn't hesitate. She looked at Nathaniel's dimming, dying eyes. There was no fear left in her, only a desperate, consuming desire to see him live. She rolled up the sleeve of her ruined silk nightgown, exposing the pale skin of her wrist, and shoved it directly against his mouth. "Take it," she ordered, her voice breaking with raw emotion. "Drink, now!" Nathaniel's fangs descended, driven by the last vestige of his primal instinct. He bit down. The moment her blood hit his tongue, the room seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't poison. Flooded with the oxytocin and adrenaline of a willing, desperate savior, the Lazarus strain ignited. To Dominic's horror, the reaction was instantaneous. A blinding, golden heat seemed to radiate from Nathaniel's veins. The black, necrotic rot spider webbing across his face halted, sizzled, and began to violently recede. The chalky white ash flaking from his skin dissolved, replaced by the flawless, terrifyingly pale marble of true immortality. The bullet wounds in his back expelled the lead, sealing over in seconds. Nathaniel Vane's eyes snapped open. They were no longer dull grey. They were a brilliant, burning, predatory crimson. He stood up. The sheer concussive force of his aura returning shattered the remaining windows in the penthouse. The winter wind howled into the room, whipping his dark hair around his perfectly restored, majestic face. Dominic backed away, dropping his knife, his face draining of all color. "My lord, it was a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect you from the human." Nathaniel moved faster than the human eye could track. 1 second, he was standing beside Rowan. The next, his hand was wrapped entirely around Dominic's throat, lifting the treacherous second-in-command 3 feet off the floor. "You dared to threaten what is mine." Nathaniel's voice was no longer a rasp. It was the terrifying, booming thunder of a god who had reclaimed his throne. With a sickening, effortless crunch, Nathaniel snapped Dominic's neck, tossing the body aside like a broken doll. The remaining guards dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the glass-covered floor in absolute, trembling submission. The king was back. The room fell deathly silent, save for the howling Chicago wind. Nathaniel slowly turned around. The terrifying predator was back in full force, radiating danger and power. He walked toward Rowan, who was sitting on the floor, clutching her bleeding wrist, her chest heaving. He knelt before her, entirely ignoring the groveling guards. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a pristine silk handkerchief, and gently, reverently, tied it around her wounded wrist. His touch was no longer freezing and brittle. It was cool, strong, and deeply reassuring. "You saved me," he murmured, looking at her with a devotion that bordered on religious worship. "You gave me back the eternity I was losing. You took a bullet for me," Rowan breathed, a breathless, exhausted laugh escaping her lips. "I figured I owed you a drink." Nathaniel smiled, a real, breathtaking smile that transformed his intimidating features into something devastatingly handsome. He gently cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I owe you my life, Rowan Gallagher," Nathaniel swore softly, the crimson in his eyes melting into a warm, protective gold. "This city, this empire, all of it is yours now. You will never have to scrape by in the shadows again. You are the queen of my world now, and I will spend the rest of eternity proving that you were right to save me." Rowan looked at the immortal king kneeling at her feet, the glittering skyline of Chicago framing his shoulders. She had spent her entire life invisible, a forgotten street sweeper, cleaning up the messes of the elite. But as Nathaniel pulled her gently to her feet and into his arms, wrapping her in a warmth she had never known, she realized the truth. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was the heartbeat of an immortal empire. Thank you so much for reading this incredible journey of love, survival, and hidden supernatural empires. If Rowan and Nathaniel's story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and share this video with your fellow romance and fantasy lovers. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another thrilling original story. Drop a comment below. Would you have trusted the Vampire King? See you in the next one.